is really about. So our subject here is not something from an old dusty book that doesn't have relevance in our time. But as I've just spoken, the last couple of minutes, I've only addressed just a kind of 101 of the nature of consciousness. And the text that we're speaking from, it's like, well, 108, let's say, of the possibilities of consciousness, nature of consciousness, what lies there. I've given a numerical example at times in the past with repeating that if you're in negative numbers, which we could compare to the implications of karma, which is a type of movement that has repercussions. In other words, we take, and so we owe. So we're in negative numbers. We're moving, but we're actually going backwards. We don't really acquire anything other than a debt, because what we do acquire apparently can't keep, but the debt we keep. So we remain indebted, and then from the point of view of Vedanta, in a cycle. We're going, up the down escalator. So we're going round and round and round in the circle game. So she got that right. So if we go from negative numbers to zero, then that zero has a positive connotation. That's coming out of negativity. And the work, the movement is we're moving because someone's chasing us, but we don't know that it's us. That we're chasing ourselves, perpetuating the struggle, so to speak, because we are hunting, and whether that's acquiring, taking, with the sense that if we acquire more, we'll be complete. We're honestly thinking that we're incomplete, having identified with a particular configuration of matter that's not going to remain as it is. So it's troublesome. So we want, without any sense of anything more than that, we want it to be, in fact, all that we are without knowing ourselves. So in order to try to accomplish that, we take from the world, we exploit. Because we're taking from others are taking from us, but we're perpetuating that. We're like hunters that are being hunted, but our own hunting is perpetuating the fact that we're being hunted. It's just the nature of the beast, if you will, material existence. So, to come to zero, that's a big relief, peaceful. And many transcendentalists understandably will stop there. Goodness, what more can be said? If you've been chased for a long time and you finally get to rest and there's nobody to bother you, peaceful, then it has a kind of a negative bliss to it. End of sorrow, end of the struggle. It's a big thing, huge. If you could realize the extent to which you exist, then you would have no sorrow, no fear, no anxiety. We're all struggling with these things, so it's a huge accomplishment. And as I say, given that, many transcendentalists or schools, paths aimed at finding our way out of the maze of material existence. We'll stop there. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had the adventurous spirit to ask at zero, are there any positive numbers? What that might be like. Oh, the Gyanis, that hurt their heads. Big thinkers. We thought our way this far. We stopped. Now again, there's work to be done. We have to go, yes, from war to peace. Then we want to rest. The war of karmic involvement, to come to peace, to rest. But what we're talking about is love. So in love, there is also movement. There's also some struggle, if you will, but it's worthwhile and rewarding struggle. It has ups and it has downs. We move in the world to find love. We cannot rest until we do, and when we do, we find it has an orbit of its own. So I'm giving, of course, just an ordinary common example that I draw from to appreciate the philosophical point that while coming from negative numbers to the zero of understanding, I'm not confined even by time and space. I'm eternal. There's a bliss in that, the bliss of being, without worrying about having to become. There's a bliss in the relief. This is minimal, huge, but minimal comparatively. So that is my point. So from peace, is there any movement in transcendence? Brahman, which is the Sanskrit word used to refer to the absolute in stillness, is thought to be omnipresent, omniscient, all present, everywhere, and all knowing. So, as I often say, if you're everywhere, well, there's nowhere to go, so there's no movement, then stillness. If you know everything also, then you have no impetus to do anything, to find anything out. So Brahman, this is a feature of the absolute that's still by nature. And Krishna, Bhagavan, is that feature of the absolute truth that's moving despite the fact that it's everywhere. That it's everywhere. So that, again, doesn't fit too well between the ears, but if you're everywhere and you know everything, and therefore there's nothing to do, you might get bored. So there's a problem with omniscience, a problem with omnipresence. And how do we deal with boredom? Well, we play. We make up a game. So Lila is something like that, but the game is real. And it constitutes movement and transcendence that in the broadest sense involves an interaction between ourselves and our source. Interaction, reciprocal dealings, if you will. There's some kind of movement in transcendence where the finite interacts with the infinite. Now, for that interaction to be more friendly and less abstract and more like the kind of movement that we feel comfortable with whenever we have it in material life, like intimacy with another, be that our partner, our child, our friend. The world's really moving around these things. The humans are living for love, if you will. So is there any possibility that within transcendence, that abstract idea of movement there and interaction between the self and its source can become more concrete, if you will, and more intimate? And that's when we come to Krishna Lila, where the infinite has taken a finite like form in order to afford intimacy with the finite. Because if the finite knew it was sitting next to the infinite, then it would be pushed back a little bit and say, "Oh my God, oh my God." So it would be difficult to be friendly with such a feature of the absolute. It would be difficult to be friendly in all respects. Say, "Get it yourself." Among friends, we can talk like that. Get it yourself. So the stories, if you will, the legends, the Leelas that we have been discussing, they come from a section of the Bhagavatam that's about this friendly type of love. Kaliya Krishnadas, one of the great saints in our culture, called it Sakya. Rupa Goswami before him called it Preo Bhakti. In his Preeti Sandarbha, Goswami calls it Maitri. These are all different words to try to convey a sense of friendliness. This is one of the aesthetic centers of the 10th book of the Bhagavad, which tells the story of Krishna. It's a telling of the story of Krishna, who was a historical figure, Ram and Krishna, historical figures about whom we have some archaeological evidence, information, literary legacy as to their walking in human society and so forth. But what the text is about is Vyas, the legendary author of the sacred texts of the Hindus, a sage. It's about his meditation on the historical Krishna with a controlled yogic, if you will, mind, completely detached from the workings of the mind that cause us to be biased in this way, or our senses drive that cause us to be biased in another way. In other words, yoga and spiritual life is about objectivity to the extreme when properly understood. It's not just an imagination. Experience derives from stepping back from our material emotions and reining in the senses in terms of their penchant to reach out and interact with sense objects of taste, of touch, sight, sound, and so forth, and the emotional life that comes from that and so forth. That doesn't give us a clear picture of the nature of reality, because through the medium of the senses, we may think, she's nice, and another person may think, I don't like her at all, or him, or this or that. Which is it nice or not, good, bad, or it's hot or cold, or they're all just readings through instruments that are obviously in conflict with one another, and not giving a clear picture of what's out there. So yoga is about stepping back with the same kind of objectivity, for example, that a scientist is supposed to have. The only difference is he only wears a white coat, or she only wears a white coat in the lab. With yoga, you have to wear a white coat or something like this all the time. Not all of you. It's wrong. You have to, where they say, what? So, what I'm saying to you is that in spiritual life, practice is not about offering things on the altar. It's about that, but what's really about is putting yourself on the altar, in the fire of sacrifice, if you will. Your sense of self, derived from the sense of my, and the small little I that comes from that, which is false because nothing is ours. That has to be sacrificed. It's called, ego effacement, ego sacrifice. This is necessary if your spiritual path is to have any real currency for purchasing real estate in a land beyond death. You can't go there with your shoes on. That's not possible. You can't take the baggage of your attachments with you. You have to let them go. Now, of course, don't be alarmed, don't run out the door. It's a gradual process. And the beautiful thing about Bhakti is we will let go by holding on. We hold on to saintly people, their teaching, their example, and it gives us strength to let go, because it gives us higher taste and experience, and sets an example for us that the goal is extraordinarily high. Again, we're talking about positive numbers up to 108. We're just ordinary people. We're not living in the Himalayas in a cave. So I reached zero, everything's good. Who's like standing out in everybody's eyes. And what is our position? We're ordinary people. We met some saints, we like Krishna. Well, that has a lot to it. A lot to it. It's like, let's say you are a doorman at an 11-story building. And every day you're opening the door for people. That's your position. You could rise in the company eventually, possibilities there, and become the CEO and reside on the 11-story penthouse. The 11-story penthouse. It's possible. Next door is a 108-story building. Let's say you're a doorman in the 108-story building, and somebody else is the CEO in the penthouse in the 11-story building. And every day he looks down, and as he drives by, there's the doorman, and he goes up into his 11-story building. Meanwhile, you're the doorman at the 108-story building with a prospect to be the CEO in the 108-story building. And look down at the 11-story CEO, that he's just a doorman. So the point is that by good association, we have to evaluate our position in consideration of our association. I have an ashram in mountain jungle ashram in Costa Rica. Big, a couple 150 acres in the jungle and mountains, very nice. Nice country. It's in Latin America, which is a pretty hot political climate at times, and there can be revolutions and so forth in the little history of Central America and so forth. And Costa Rica has no army. So you'd think, man, if you just look at Costa Rica with a small focus on the country it's in danger. It's next to Nicaragua, that they have a lot of turmoil there some years back and so forth. But if you draw back, not that this is a good thing, this is using an example, it has the support of the United States, which makes the Nicaraguan army look pretty small in comparison. So it has no army, it's a peaceful country, but it's safe there if we look at it in terms of its association, its backing, and so forth. Right? So when you're connected with the 108, just by someone in that realm or who has some real insight into that, thinking about us, caring about us, then we're in a better position than the sage in the Himalayas, taking in a deep breath and letting out, feeling relief, and it's zero. It's really staggering to think of it like that. What we understand from this is that Bhakti as a tradition is a grace, and a tradition of grace. In yoga, there's a lot of effort. Ashtanga yoga, it's an effort-filled path, to be sure. You have to be. You can't have any friends. I mean, if you really want to follow the tradition carefully, you have to live in a secluded place. And it's got a whole kind of rules. You can't sit too high, you can't sit too low, and so on and so forth. It's all described in the classical texts. If I mean, you can use yoga in any way you want, I suppose, and get accused of cultural appropriation or whatever. But if you use it for what it's meant for, well, it's meant for all cultures, for all people. It's meant to transcend cultures, gender, and so on and so forth. But there are talking about some yogis of this Yoga Sutras, which is also described in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, you know, it's a system. You got to do it right to experience transcending gender limitations, national limitations of time and space, and so forth. And one of the things in it is that you can't have any friends. You can't have a partner. Well, that's a friend. You have to be celibate, according to texts. This is one of the. But that's a pretty high qualification. You're going to sit, after all. It's about sitting. So it's hard to sit. They sound easy, but it's not so easy, okay? Because something is making you get up. Who made me get up? I want to sit in it. It's those thoughts, those desires in your heart in relation to things that you think are more than thoughts. That's what you use your thinking for, to think about things. That's not what we're thinking about. Things. You think deeply enough about things, you'll stop thinking about them. Gyan, that's another system. It's a type of yoga, it's Sadhana yoga of knowledge. It's very difficult. Both of these are effort-based paths. Bhakti, by contrast, is another type of yoga, but it's a grace-based path. It's bringing someone bigger, if you will, more affections into your life. So there's an effort in Bhakti, but it's an effort to get grace. That's a very different kind of effort. You have to cry. That's your yoga. And try it. It's not so easy, but it sounds easier than many postures and living alone in a cave and so forth. And we do cry at times for others, and so we know a little bit what it's like. We can bring a person into our life, in this case, that infinite appearing in a finite light form, that we might interact with the infinite in intimacy. That's what we mean by Krishna. That Brahman that's everywhere, in play, in drama. It appears in a finite human-like form, that we might interact intimately with the Absolute. So our effort is to bring him into our life. And how do we do that? And, well, there are persons who have entered into the play of Lila. Excuse me. And they try to talk about it. It's beyond words. I was saying the other day, I used to be involved in circulating the publications of my Guru Maharaj to people in large scale. And sometimes, fairly often, I'd meet a person who felt pretty wise and would say, truth is not in the book. You're going to find it in the truth in the book. Good point. So I agreed with him, and I sold him the book. Because I told him, where'd you learn that? What book did you read? It's true. It's more than the book. So you got to get through the book, which is what is the book? In this case, this is someone who's there trying to put it into words. If it's beyond words, why say anything? The answer is no. How can I say enough? How can I be silent? This is proper use of the tongue. To try and talk about that, to put it into words. Now, those words, those depictions of that realm of Lila, where there's interaction between the finite and the infinite and intimacy. But that realm, beyond words, beyond thought, experienced in the trance of Bhakti Yoga, somebody else like Vijay Kama. When that is talked about, when that is written about by persons who have that experience, using, as I said earlier, the medium of drama, art, poetry to try to say something about it, that poetry, that literature has inherent spiritual power. What's described there, of course, is only some kind of an outline of that experience of Lila. But you can get your bearings there, if you will, right? Get the proper orientation to what is Lila. So such texts, such discussions, they're very important. Now, again, we're talking about something that is beyond, from negative numbers of harm to 0 to 108,008. So it's going to go over some of our heads. Right? We're all here for different reasons and similar reasons and different levels of interest and acquaintance with the teaching and so forth. And I appreciate everybody's interest, and it helps me. So for my own good, I'm a very selfish person. To be in your good company, interest in this will help me to understand it, I'm sure. So in talking about it, it might be too high for some, might be too low for others, so you have to be a little patient. I think this introduction, if you will, that I've been laboring with here, is something that most of you can get under the handle on and digest. But now I want to depart from that, if you will, or go on from there and continue the discussion we've been having from the recorded text, Bhagavad Purana, that's telling the story of Krishna as he enters into boyhood. Now we start to lose some people here, but anyway, it's good to hear. There's a saying or an idea in Ayurveda. Ayurveda is an ancient form of medicine. You might have heard about it. Be familiar with it. It's an alternative form of medicine that's available in the world today, in ancient form. And if someone has a very severe case of dysentery, which if you go into your experience of that, then you can't eat anything. And if you try, you won't be able to digest it, it'll just come back up. So the cure, I'm not an Ayurvedic doctor. Heard this is a good way of making a point. So they'll give you a tablespoon of ghee. Ghee is milk turned into butter condensed further into like oil, butter oil, ghee. It's very, very rich and very, very intense, and it's very difficult to digest comparatively. Has its place, quite tasty too. So if you have dysentery, you can't keep anything down, and you take a spoonful of ghee, well, you're certainly going to vomit it up. So we say to the doctor, "Wait a minute, I don't know, eat ghee." The point is, it's such a rich food that a little bit will stick, a tiny bit will stick, and then you build on that. So when we talk about Krishna Lila from the Bhagavad, like I say, it may go over our heads, even some of the devotees who have been practicing for many years. The subject of discussion, the terms, the feelings, may go over their head. Most speaker persons who are not familiar with such discussions, but there's a benefit there, really, in this kind of sangha, this kind of gathering, hearing these things. And often they're very inviting, so they tend to have repeat customers. Repeat customers. So offer a spoonful of tea. See my dog, we've been eating this stuff. So we're a little intoxicated. Please forgive us. It is said to be such. Nigamakopatoroglitam palam. Shukamukaramadadavasimtam. Pivata bhagavatam vasumala. Muraho rasikabuhi bhavuka. It's said about the text of the Bhagavatam, which we're again discussing. This is a very, very rich text, it says at its onset. It's different than the other sacred texts of the Hindus, the other Puranas, the Veda, the Bhagavad Gita, and that it is Kaliya, it's poetry, it is a rasa. Rasa is the soul of poetry, when through poetic or theatrical performance, recital performance, various aesthetic ingredients combine emotions. It can rise to the point of what's called rasa, emotional experience. This is a whole science of aesthetics from Eastern Indian Hindu point of view, but as you know, when you go to a movie or something, you can identify with the actors, you can start to feel their emotions. You get displaced from your own, where you're sitting, and you're transported into their feelings, so to speak. So the discussions of Krishna Lila are paradigmatic figures in there, meant to share their emotions with us and transport us into that. But the text says, I said at the bottom at its onset, this book is a book, it's about the soul of poetry. If all of the Hindu sacred texts are the standard of knowledge, it's the most luminous body of literature on earth, and its subject, centrally speaking, is consciousness. Well, that's a pretty important subject, as we said earlier. It's hard to get around that. We tried in Western society from a Newtonian worldview, in which the world was seen as a machine, and the idea of consciousness was, what's that? We know how the world works. There's electromagnetic energy, there's strong and weak nuclear energy, there's gravitational, magnetic energy, whatever it is. Some basic forces, and the whole world works by those forces. There's no room for anything else. The world's a machine. This idea of a soul, well, that's the ghost in the machine that needs to be exorcised. This superstitious thinking. Well, things change. And the Newtonian worldview is given way to some extent, as much as you were willing to admit it, to a quantum perspective about what's out there, the nature of the objective world. And now consciousness is important, because well, arguably, the observer plays a role in everything. That doesn't work with what we've understood for hundreds of years and thought we had it all figured out. So we're not going to let go of that. And then you get into Eastern spiritual interpretations of quantum, simple science. We have nothing to do. Not interested in that. We're going to keep trying to reduce consciousness to matter, mind to brain. There's nothing but physical forces. We want to be rational people. There's nothing but the natural world. There's no supernatural. And given that if I may continue, given that there's, in that perspective, only the natural world, only the physical, there's no mental, just a brain. We think there's a self, but that's an illusion. There's only physical forces interacting. Given that, as I say, if I make it to you, there's no really right or wrong action. They're just physical forces. That's a human construct, that there's a right or wrong. Doesn't matter if you pick a flower or you shoot someone. It's just physical forces interacting. You can overlay it with some moral sensibility, but that's not part of the talk, which is difficult to walk. You understand? The talk is just physical forces interacting. Now try walking that talk. Not only by extension, if there's no right or wrong action, well, there's no right or wrong thought. So much for your rationality. According to your own philosophy, reason has no bearing on the nature of reality. So the whole thing is rather absurd, but it has a lot of currency in the world, and there are reasons for that, but we won't go into them. Vedanta, on the other hand, as I said, the sacred text of the Hindus is all about the nature of consciousness and gives us a different perspective. It doesn't wonder what is the biological or physical basis of consciousness. It just looks at the thing the whole opposite way around. The objective world comes out of the subjective world, which makes a little sense because how much more complex are thoughts than things? Well, they're quite a bit more complex. Well, it's reasonable to conjecture that less complex things will come out of more complex things. How complex is experience compared to non-experience? Is there any experience in non-experience? Well, no, I mean, that's stupid to ask, isn't it? But if matter is a non-experience in substance, isn't it a bit magical thinking to think that at some point experience will arise within it? You think at some point that you're playing pool, one of the pool balls and say, "Could you put a chalk on me?" It'll be silly. That is materialism. That's what it says. That consciousness has a biological and physical basis that appears at some. We don't know how yet, but believe us, give us your money. It does. Well, we just look at it the other way, and it's an old teaching that's been around for a lot longer than that theory. A lot longer. And there's much to it. We can't go into it in great depth, but this is the central subject of the sacred texts. And this text, the Bhagavad, describing the Lila of Krishna, says at its onset, oh, the Vedic, the sacred texts of the Hindus, they're like a great tree of knowledge, which is many branched. While consciousness is central to them, and understanding it, experiencing what it means to be a particle of consciousness. It's many branches of knowledge arising out of that. And on that tree of sacred text, there's a fruit. It's a ripe fruit, phalam, and it's galitam. It's fallen to the ground, so it's easy to get. You don't have to climb at risk of falling. The tree is bent over and drops the fruit for you. That's what this book is like. And it's just so ripe with insight and into the nature of not only what consciousness is, but what's prospect is, what possibilities lie in the realm of consciousness. What's beyond just I'm different from matter, which is a big thing. What is the consciousness of consciousness? It's love, it says. We don't want just peace. I got to zero. I want love, peace and love. Now there's movement. We can say the forms of this world are here today and gone tomorrow. Your consciousness, not any of these forms that are just like a dream. It was there, it lasts a little longer, but it's gone. Right? Prince Charming turned into a couch potato. It took a little longer than the dream last night, but it happened. What to do now? Goodness. That's what's happening. Vice versa, all from the works is around. The problem. So, okay, we can get that kind of. Forms seem to be limiting, constraining, but beyond the form. Now we come to zero, but now we're going to start talking about positive numbers. We're going to talk about forms again. Wow, this is getting confusing. This means consciousness taking a shape. Think of it like this. What's making the forms in this world? When we invest as a unit of consciousness, or invest ourselves in matter, it takes a shape. Like this house, right? It takes on a meaning and certain values and so forth. If you just take the basic elements that it's constructed out of, well, it took a consciousness investing in those elements in a particular way, it took a shape. So what if consciousness would turn inward on itself entirely? Then the possibility that forms could arise out of consciousness that don't have the limitations of material forms. And as much as form may be constraining and limiting, from another angle of vision, it's also facilitating. If I ask for some water, nobody's just going to throw it at me. They're going to give it in the form of a glass, which will facilitate my taking advantage of it. So forms don't have to be limited. So and when we move from zero, as I'm saying, to 108, where are we moving? We're moving in a direction of affection, of love, from peace to love and affection. And love has a shape, it takes a shape, form. There's a form to love. Just like, let's say, you have an idea, a beautiful idea. You're an artist, so you need to give it a shape, right? You need to put it on the canvas, and then everybody can appreciate it. And so forth, right? So the book says, "Oh, this book here, amongst all the sacred texts, this is like the ripe fruit. It's like, it smells sweet. It's just full of juice." Literal meaning of rasa is juice. It's juice. It's an intoxicating beverage. It constitutes psychological, emotional life in transcendence. That's a mouthful, I know. But and so the text says to take this fruit and don't eat it, drink it. It's ready to be drunk. It's so something. And it says, and what will be the result? You will pass out. And what should you do? Then get up and do it again. Amen. So I'm really drinking this for a while. It's, again, we begin in the 15th chapter, the 10th canto, studying about the boyhood of Krishna. Jesus become able to herd cows. So we went through writing a book about this particular kind of love. In this particular chapter, I made 4 chapters out of it. So there's quite a bit there. But we haven't got through the whole thing because it's complicated. But the speaker of the text, the narrator, who's being described in the text, is is reluctant to tell another story about Krishna, the hero. And so he puts it off as long as he can. But his student is too curious to hear about it. He draws it out from him. This is the story of Kaliya. And it's a story in which the heroism of Krishna, that is one of his qualities, his heroism, which is called an udipana. It's kind of an excitement for the sentiment of fraternal love of God. So Krishna's those who have entered into the Lila transcendence and taken forms like young boys, like Krishna, they relish his heroism because they think, yeah, he's like us. I could have done that. He did that. So the heroism stands out for them, like other qualities of Krishna stand out for devotees in one type of sentiment, whether it be romantic sentiment, fraternal sentiment, and so forth. There are a number of them. This was just one. But the point here is that in this particular Lila, the heroism of Krishna comes into question. He's performing heroic act, but looks like he may not be successful. This is a drama. So Sukadeva, meanwhile, before he tells the story, as the cowherds come home from the Dainikasura Lila, Krishna is now entering from boyhood into adolescence, and he experiences Purvarag. He sees the gopikas, the milk maidens, they exchange glances at a distance, and they experience a love for one another without having been able to express it yet, which creates kind of a love, but there's separation because you can't express it. It's called Purvarag in aesthetics. And there's only a couple of verses on it, but it really turns the head of the Kirtanir, who's telling the story at Sukadeva. And he enters into Surup city during the Purvarag, first instance of describing the Purvarag in the pages of the Bhagavatam. Sanatana Goswami in his commentaries, and here he is attained Surup city, which means he's been telling the story. And this is not only are those who are hearing it becoming acquainted with it, being transported from their material absorption and so forth, and you take within it, the speaker is going within it, and in a more concentrated way. Because you have to think about what you're going to say, or so the speaker benefits immensely. Those who ask questions, they benefit, the audience benefits, anyway, all around. So he is engaged. Kirtan is one of the principal forms in which Bhakti, the yoga of Bhakti, is engaged in. Kirtan means, like, as I came in, you're just saying, my friend was leading the kirtan. So that's one type of kirtan, singing the names of Krishna, Nam Kirtan. This is now kind of like Lila Kirtan. Sukadeva was doing Lila Kirtan, telling the Leelas of Krishna. And he became perfect. What is his perfection? He saw himself in the Lila that he's talking about. And from there, then he continued to talk about it from that perspective. And he entered in Gopi Bhav, who had a very, very tender heart. And the Kaliya Lila had a particularly troubling effect on the young Braj Kishoris, the young girls, particularly. It affected everyone. It's a Lila in which the heroism of Krishna became visible for everyone in the village, not just boys talking about something, probably telling a tale they came home from Calvary with Krishna, and Krishna did this and that. And the elders would think, well, maybe, boys will be boys, and tell stories. Krishna's just our son. We love him. He's wonderful, no doubt, but that sounds like a tall tale. But in this Lila, they all saw this. And they were all affected different, of course. From a current perspective, it's probably more of a tall tale, they think. The gopis, they think, that sounds like the man of my dreams. When the cowards would come home telling, Krishna did this, Krishna did that. But for the cowards, he did it, it's real. It's normal for him. That's how they feel. Different feelings there, different players, different sentiments, different concepts. So Sukadev entering into Gopi Bhav, it was difficult for him to tell a story, but his student, Raj, the setting is that the sage appeared on the bank of the Ganges where the emperor had gone and sat with a view to understand the purpose of life. And all kinds of people gathered to tell him what to do at the time of death, he thought. Because it was an oracle that he would die in 7 days. So what's it all about? You can imagine the king gets preoccupied with a lot of different things. So what's it all about? It became really very philosophical. And so many people came to volunteer answers, and then walked this boy, 16-year-old boy, naked, and oblivious to his nakedness. And the people could understand, well, he might know about this because he has no attachments. He doesn't even attach to clothes, doesn't even know he needs them. And what's the problem with death? Oh, it's our attachments. We can't take them with us. So what's the problem? But he understood that. He had no attachment, so he can get the answer. And everybody's happy. Right? And in the context of giving the answer, he further entered into the answer himself. He perfected himself. Right? He didn't want to tell this next story that we are already in the middle of telling from last night, a couple of days previously. He didn't want to tell the story, but the king, the emperor, he was on the edge of his seat. What happened? He told a little bit of it, just I'll say a couple words, couple of verses at the end of the 15th chapter, 3-4 verses. Try to put it to rest. But the Raj said, I'm a disciple. You can't hide anything from me. I'm giving everything to you. I've come for everything. This little rule, right? Let's give everything to those who want everything. She has to have everything to give it. So we're more than the disciple privileges. So he told a story. And it's a long story, but to make a long story short will be difficult. But the point you're at in it, the Jamuna, the lake, the river, that was so central to the community, as any body of water would makes civilization near a body of water, where there will also be well water in the ground, so where you can use the river for commerce and so on and so forth for practical reasons, as in this case as well for esoteric reasons, because the Dham, the abode, the sacred geography where Krishna performs his Lila is an extension of his own self. God in his play, in the course of enacting a drama, manifests the scene. So the Dham, it means light, but it means also the abode, the theater itself. So the theater, in the Tantra, Krishna says that Vrindavan is my body, he says. And the Jamuna, the river, is my central nervous system. Sushumna Nadi, that in the microcosm of our bodies is the artery through which yogis from the heart go and come out the top of their head. It's a difficult process. So he says, but those who meditate on my abode, they can go there just by swimming in the Jamuna. It's very easy comparatively. It's very dear to me, the Jamuna, Govardhan, the mountain there. It's very dear to me, given that there's a community of cows and it provides fodder for them and so on and so forth. So he's concerned because a portion of the Jamuna has become polluted. It's an old, long story, but this Naga, the Naga community, underworld people, very depicted like snakes, half snakes. There's good ones and bad ones. So Kaliya was a Naga. His mother was Kagru, the mother of the Nagas, whose chief son was Ananta sage, the carrier of Vishnu. Kaliya was his brother. So he had Vaishnava association, good association, but he didn't take advantage of it. He even married Kaliya Naga. He had a few wives, and they were all devotees of Narayan, form of Krishna. So he was, from his brotherhood or his own family life, he had devotees in his life, and they were always fostering on him impressions about devotion, virtues, of such and so forth. But he was, resisting that. He was offensive. Garuda was his half brother. He was inimical towards him. When he heard that Garuda was no longer going to the Jamuna, then he went there. He thought, I'll reside there. But he poisoned the lake. It's a long story. We talked about a number of the details of that. It's interesting in and of itself. But ultimately, Krishna, who was, as I said, just in his boyhood, was herding cows, and every day his mother would say, "You may go and herd, but don't go to that Kaliya lake. Nobody goes there. That's poisonous. Don't go there." So he's in his boyhood. Now you can understand. The more she cautioned him, "Don't go there," the more he was going to go there. There wasn't a day that went by that he didn't think, "I will slay that. I will correct that Kaliya, save the Jamuna, and express his heroism and so forth." So in order to further ensure that he wouldn't do such, typically, and in this instance as well, he sort of fosters sort of Vatsalya, the parental of the Balaram. And he has Sangu Bhav, so this Sakiraka is packaged with Dasya and also Vatsalya that aren't compatible with Sakya, but he experiences them separately from Sakya. And when he sort of experiences Vatsalya, Sakya kind of recedes a little bit to the background. She's always fostering her Vatsalya. You're the older brother. You should take care of protect him. Don't let him go to that lake. Don't let him go to the lake. Whatever you do. So Krishna's waiting for an opportunity. It didn't take too long because the day of Ram's, in the Vedic culture, they would celebrate the day that the moon went into constellation each month that presided over the day of your birth. So it's like a mini birthday, a monthly birthday. And so Balaram was held home and captive by parental love on this day. He sent a message with Subal, according to Bhakti Sindhu. Tell Krishna, don't go to the Kaliya lake. I can't come today. But he didn't get there in time. And all of Krishna went. They brought cows that were pregnant, thinking there are really good grasses there that nobody goes there. So there's really good grasses, good for the pregnant cows. So he went ahead of the cows and the young herdsmen to expect the scene, and meanwhile the cows drank the water. They died. Just hold the breath. And then the boys thought, well, we are in charge of the cows. It's our dharma. We're Vaishyas, leaders. And so how are we going to come home without the cows? And to show our allegiance to the cows, they drank the water. we'll die too. So this, of course, then came to Krishna's attention. And then you see, the beauty of this is that this intimacy, this human likeness that we're talking about, the background of it is the majesty of the Krishna's, this Brahman who's everywhere, right? So if you and I do something like this, it's kind of ordinary, but if God acts like us, that's pretty extraordinary. That's like far out. So, such is the nature of the Lila. But sometimes the God of Krishna shows up in the Lila, right? Shows itself, because the Lila is being narrated in such a way where the narrator and the author is walking a tightrope between Aishvarya and Madhurya. Aishvarya, and he's telling the stories of Krishna with which we can easily bond emotionally, because we feel like that as humans. We know what friendly love is like. We know what romantic love is like. We know it. So when you hear that, and you have a little affinity for Krishna, you bond with him. There's no other tradition like this that you could bond with the Godhead through your human emotions. And that bonding starts to build an attraction, which, if followed by yoga practices, prayer, chanting, and so on and so forth, will turn into a taste that drives your practice. And the practice is not a practice. It's what you like to do. It's an attachment. To do the things that we're attached to doing is effortless. So this is the way in which we become attached to Krishna. So I have a little philosophy on it to figure it all out, but eventually when you get that down, it's quite likable. And so Aishvarya Shakti is the majesty, the God who took an opportunity to have a role in the sweetness of the Lila, because now all the cowherds had died and the cows and they were pregnant and the boys had died. So Krishna's expanded himself into as many forms as there were cowherd boys and as many cows as there were cows, and revived each one individually. And each one thought, Krishna's bringing me back. And they wept. And the cows licked him as if he was their new calf. And the calves inside their womb kicked, because I'd like to get out and see him too. So, brought back to life, then Krishna proceeded to the lake's edge where the Kaliya was in the lake, and he jumped in. And then they all fainted. Oh my God. They experienced the coward was septic above, like fainting, like being stunned. And the septic above saved them. Their ecstasy saved them from jumping in along with Krishna after him, which would have been not the right thing to do. So they were saved by their septic above. Meanwhile, stunned as they were in no position to tell anybody else. And it appeared that Krishna needs help here. He's dumped in the lake. We don't see him now. So they had no recourse to tell anybody. So the environment, the intelligence within the environment, we say the devas, the intelligence behind the realm, hard to explain, but it created natural occurrences like meteors falling, earth tremors, and so forth. And so the balance of the community, the elders, the young adolescent girls, and so forth, were all back with Ram, Krishna's elder brother, who had stayed home, right? And so they were they saw the omens and knew something wrong here. Krishna, and immediately Krishna, yes, and they looked to Ram, who we described his reaction to that. How he smiled and Sukadeva didn't like that. Why is he not big? Is he drunk? Is he penchant for tall fruit and so forth? Calling Bhagavan Madhavo Bahalo. But what is this? He's from a Kshatriya lineage, he has a hard heart. Sukadeva is thinking all these things. The Balaram is smiling because he's thinking, there's Krishna, I know what he's doing. Because he's omniscient also, being manifestation of the God himself. So he's another line, Sage Ananta and he's resting on these in the causal ocean. And now he's resting on Kaliya. Krishna had come out from the ocean. He was in the coils of Kaliya. So anyway, he led all the community to the lake, and there they were ready to jump in. He had to restrain them and so forth. We've gone through all the many details of this and all the feelings that arise from it. But Balaram was confident in his omniscience that obviously nothing can happen to Krishna, but he was also distraught because the rest of the inhabitants, without that sense of omniscience steeped in their bhava, were feeling great concern and anxiety. So Krishna, seeing the conflicting emotions of Balaram, his friend, brother, best friend, I should take myself out of this, the coils of, so he had gone into the ocean and came out and he was in the grip of the cobra, if you will. That's the situation. Now, the question is, what happened underneath the water? Right? This is a Kaliya is a person, a being, whatever, in the Lila, who Krishna is dealing with. It has some enmity, but he's not like all the henchmen of Kamsa. As I said, he has wives who are devotees. His brother is a devotee. His half brother is a famous gorilla, famous devotee. He wasn't sent there by Kamsa either. He is a different. He's in a different trajectory. Krishna's going to deal with him differently. So underneath the water, you have to imagine Krishna has now jumped into the water. What does he do? He manifests his Matsya. He swims like Matsya. I mean, Kaliya is like, okay, he's a good swimmer. But when he sees Krishna swimming, he sees him and he feels the vibration coming off of Krishna, which is like music. And this is Kaliya now is those samskars for bhakti that he's received, that he's rejected, the seeds for bhakti. Krishna's drawing on them. He's watering them by his presence there. And what's happening underneath the water, no one else can see, is Kaliya is becoming a devotee himself. He tries to bite Krishna. Actually, he's trying to kiss Krishna, but he doesn't know how to do it. He wants to embrace Krishna in love, but like a new devotee, he makes a lot of mistakes. He doesn't do it right. Oh no, I might have made him an offense here, a bit of that. But Krishna's Baba Grahijanarda, he just takes the spirit of it. So on the outside, it looks like Kaliya is very inimical to Krishna, but Krishna's converting him by his power. He's trying to kiss him, trying to embrace him. He comes out of the water, he's holding him there. And Krishna's feeling kind of comfortable. Although he's not doing it right, he's got the right feeling. Everybody else looking at it from another angle, at least it's not the Goswami's perspective on it. It's very unique. Meanwhile, everyone's on the shore, animals, birds, people, and so on and so forth. And Krishna's been in the coils of Kaliya for quite some time. So this is one of the reasons why he's there for so long. He's actually turning Kaliya into a devotee and relishing a little bit of devotion that starts to come out with him. He's bringing it out to a certain point. He brings him into a certain point so that he can chastise him. My Guru Maharaj used to say that if our Guru praises us or criticizes us, we're doing okay. But if he's indifferent to us, then that's the problem. It means he thinks this guy's not curable. So as long as he if he chastises me, he must really care about me. He took the time to single me out and so forth. But in order to be able to understand that, appreciate that, well, we have to draw the student in and show them that we love them. And then when we chastise them, they can understand that, oh, it's for my good. So it took some time. That's why it took some, why he stayed in the coils. One of the reasons for so long, because once that was complete, then he releases himself from the coil, which corresponds with freeing everybody from anxiety and so forth. He stands on the heads of Kaliya, and then he begins to dance there, which is also, he's also chastising the Kaliya. He's got many heads, he's jumping from head to head. You know, somebody's stepping on your head all the time. You can't carry up. So he's driving, the implications, he's driving out the poison of his enmity and so forth, and bringing about his devotion. Now, the interesting thing here, for those who are a little bit knowledgeable about this, some familiarity with it, is it's said that when Krishna slays the demons in the Lila in Braj, it's the Vishnu inside of him that does that, not Krishna, right? But here in this case, it's the Krishna that does it himself. How do we know? Because Krishna is dancing on Kaliya's heads, right? And chastising him. Now we could say, well, that's the Vishnu who's doing that. But it's Krishna that's doing the dancing. How do we know? Because who's he dancing for? Those young gopis who came there. Those tender-hearted gopis like Subhadeva himself. He wanted them to come there and give a prelude to the Maharaj. See what I'm like. I want to attract them, like, for romantic love. From the Madhurya perspective, this is what the whole Lila is about. It's the whole thing for him to do. Quite a orchestrated, quite everybody put through quite a bit. You can see how he's drawn by this Madhurya Rasa. It's got great power. Great power. So he danced on the heads of Kaliya to showcase his such. And then, of course, Kaliya was reformed, and his wives came out and they made a petition on his behalf. They said, what we've done is appropriate. The guy has been a terrible husband. But we love him. Anyway, he's actually been good to us, but the way he relates to devotees, we couldn't relate to that. So it's appropriate what he's done. And then they worshipped him with majesty, according to their Bhav, not intimacy, but with reverence. And then they made a petition that you be kind to Kaliya, Benedict, and so forth. So Krishna accepted their prayers and their proposal. So Kaliya came before him, and then what did he do? He petitioned Krishna to forgive him and acknowledged his godhood and so on and so forth. And he said, by the way, if it ever happens that Garuda is not available, who's your carrier, that Garuda, who I offended earlier on in the beginning, you can ride on me. And in some yugas, that's what happens. In Brihad Bhagavatamrita is described as such. Krishna chastised Kaliya, then the Nagapatnis, the wives, gave him some silk and made a grain road on Kaliya. So he has a special role in the Lila as well. Krishna's dancing on the head of chastising. It's not Narayan. He can't dance like that. Lakshmi, the consort of Narayan, wanted to see that kind of a dance. She couldn't. Certainly Narayan can't. So it's Krishna, therefore it's a Kaliya Krishna. There's a legend that says that, the extension of India was larger than what's now the nation state. So it overflowed and passed down into Cambodia, where you can find Vishnu temples, and Thailand, and what's the other one over there? Bali, Indonesia. Yeah, as far as Fiji. say. So there's a legend that Kaliya, which was sent back to his original home, because she said, "You don't have the kind of vow to live here for me, but I appreciate, I love that you do have, but you should stay in Braj, you should go to such and such a place." And then they said, some people say that's Fiji. My Guru Maharaj started a temple in Fiji, and he has the deity of Kaliya Krishna. It's not Kaliya Maharaj. Krishna, Kaliya Krishna. So, this is the end of the story here. It's actually, there is more to it than you can imagine. It goes on. So the day ended. Everything's good, but it's too late to go home. So they camped out on the banks of the Jamuna. They camped out. And all the cows, cowherd boys, gopis, and then took rest at a certain time. And Kamsa's henchman, spying on the scene, reported back, and he sent one to start a fire, surround him with fire. So Balaram woke up to the fire, called Krishna. They were surrounded by all of his friends. It looked like Krishna's wall of fire. However, so our boys thought, no, we blew out. We blew it out. And then the morning came, and the balance of the community returned home. But Balaram held back and said, "Let's go bathe in the lake now." Laid back. And showed himself as an sage. Krishna's right. So many more details we talked about a lot of times. Just a little bit of entrance into the nature of Krishna's Lila. And with that, we have a couple of devotees who we're trying to bring in so that later we can chastise them. They like it, so they come to be initiated. So why don't you both come forward, old and young alike. There's no restrictions on age or gender, race or religion. Or any religion. This is the old. He's older. I mean, he's a little more familiar with the teaching, so he's older than that's what I think.
Guru Maharaj, Ganesha told me to bring these Tulsi beads for.
Okay. Yes, good. I'll hit another pair.
Okay.
So now we're going to impart the Maha Mantra into you. My heart, do your ear, maybe your heart. You should come back up on your tongue, and you should chant it. And you have been chanting my auspices and so forth. So now you're going to chant in a more systematic way with a certain number of, a certain period of time every day and so forth, right? So we'll fix that up at this point. What it says, 10 hours a day, 8 hours a day. And so we're going to impart a mantra. We're also going to impart mantra, tapa, yogya, and nam. So pundra means this symbol here. Vishnu tilak, right? So now I'll anoint you with the tilak from the dust of that place. And the Krishna appears. And then others can tell you more about that. And then when you sit in the morning, you're going to chant, put on tilak, keep yourself very sattvic, clean, and meditate on the mantra. Right? So, in the name, I'll give you the name. family name is Das, servant. And then some name of Krishna. So Pundra Nam Tapa. Tapa means austerity. It's light too. It means knowledge in the sense that from austerity we get light. In other words, when we restrict our senses from just interacting with the sense objects, then our head starts to function. We start to be more of a thinking person. Whereas animals, less complex forms of life, don't do that. They don't say, you have two dogs, you invite them for dinner once and say, well, go first. I've had enough, you try something. So they're driven more by their particular embodiment. They'll get human lives also, have a chance to think a little bit more. But human life is for restraining the senses. That's what it's about, and controlling the mind. And people don't think of it like that. That's what they want everybody else to do. And they feel that their kids should be like that, control themselves, think deeply, so forth. So when we, I mean, even if you were forced to restrain your senses, let's say you're kidnapped and put in jail, then you have to. What happens is your mind becomes active, you become philosophical, you think about the situation, so how you get through it, right? So tapa means that. But in other traditions, similar to ours in India, but in different lineages, the way they kind of symbolize this, that this is a life of tapa also is they take a branding iron, not to do anymore, and they brand the symbols of Vishnu. We don't do that. That's not Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not like that. So I will brand you in a less abrasive way within Krishna. So it's Pundra, Nam, Tapa, mantra. I told you I'd give you the mantra. And Yogya. Now Yogya pertains to archon, which is a way of worshiping the deity on the altar. But for that, you don't need another mantra. You have to come back another time. So the yogi here would be the Sankirtan, which is the yogi for Kaliya. Krishna Varnam Tisa Krishna Sambhu Pangasta Parsha. Yat nice and Kirtan. Yajati Sumedasa. This is for Sumedasa. People who are very intelligent. They will take to this chanting like we began with. Yes, this is a very joyous way to enter into the transcendence. Is our objective. So, with that, we will begin, and I will give you the first. Okay. This is great. That sacred geographical space in India. We tend to make the pilgrimage there on a regular basis. Typically, the sadhaka, the practitioner, anoints their body 12 places with this. So I'm just going to put it on one place. There's one place on your forehead. Okay, come Okay, now comes the hard part at the top. We use more of this clay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this stamp that's been made out of metal, and it has one of the names of Krishna on it. It says Shama. Right? Now I've seen people in India that have the name of Krishna tattooed all over their whole body, or the name of Ram all over their whole body. They're making a statement. This body is for Krishna. This body, they're serious people. So I'm going to just put it here for you. Sham. Sham, Sham, Sham. It's nice. It describes the color of his complexion. Sham. It's the in aesthetics. It's the color of romantic love. It's very nice. So now, this is separate from those 5 things I mentioned. Give these next thing they made Tulsi, sacred basil. It's very used considerably in worship of Krishna. There's a whole lecture about that. I can't give it tonight, but these beads, they are said to protect you from dangers. Someone told me they will protect you from nuclear fallout. Someone told me. I have my doubts. But I admit it. But I know this, they will protect you in this way. Someone will say, well, those are nice beads. Where'd you get those? And then you go, right. Beads, who am I? What am I doing? And you have to talk about it. You're protected that. They protect you. Someone says, oh, you're devotee of Krishna. Oh, yeah, right. They remind you, I will protect you. Can someone get that from me? Right. There's a clasp there. See, here. Okay. Now, if it's too tiresome, you can add some beads on. You can have something close to you. Okay. Then so I'm going to need this. This is some T-lock for you. Is there another one? Should be this. Oh, used. I'm not going to do this. The beads go in the bag. That's right. Chant with your thumb and the middle finger. Each bead, chant the mantra. Now, do tell me how much you've been chanting. Okay, now you tell me. Okay, good. So good. Yeah, both of you good. So here's these are beads for counting how many times you'll go around. Beads are 108 beads. They're made from the tulsi, same that's around your neck, right? You chant on each bead the mantra. Go to the next one. From the big bead you start, go around to the small. It's like a tree. This is the trunk. So you go to the top, pick a fruit, and come back down. So one time around, that's one round. And another time around, backwards, it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 108. So you can continue with that same number. Okay, that's good. You also, very good. And give you the beads for counting. Yeah, no, here they are. They can show you how someone else can show you how to attach that to that. Here's for you. Awesome. And beads. So I'll be here, right here. But it's the intention behind. Wish you all well. So your name is Krishna Das. So ask all members here, your well wishes and all senior disciples and so forth, and God brothers and God sisters, bless these student devotees and their progress and live in the peace and years to help one another, support one another, right? So very well. Sri Ram Krishna Ji Jai. 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 Hari Bol. Hare Nama Krishna Jagravaya Nama 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 Keshaya Namaha. Madhavaya Yadavaya Keshaya Namaha. Madhavaya Keshaya Namaha.
Jai Om Vishnupada Pranam Parivar Acharya Sri Shishma Bhakti Vedanta Trivare Maharaj Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai.
Tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Namash, Vaibhav, Hare Krishna. Vaibhav. Madan also. So Madan, Vaibhav, Madan, Vaibhav. Madan.
I'm sorry. I tried to.